Okay. Hello, everyone. Welcome to this new webinar by Verónica Reyero. Verónica Reyero is a business anthropologist based in Valencia, Spain. Verónica is one of the founding partners with Pablo Mondragón of Antropología 2.0, a pioneering agency in applying an anthropological understanding to business challenges. And this is why Verónica mainly is here, because I've met her when we were attending in Munich last year with the invitation by Jörg Engelstadter, one meeting, and I found that Verónica and Pablo were exactly the spirit of Readmagine. Readmagine was born back 15 years ago as a mean to join the tools of different fields of action and expertise and apply them to the libraries or to the business models for the publishing industry. As a researcher, Verónica has worked both in public and private organizations, in national and international projects for several sectors, including health, food, technology, and real estate. So, as I told you, Verónica will provide us a very open landscape on what is happening with the people, with the readers, with the consumers. So Verónica, the floor is yours. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Luis. Thanks for the introduction, and thank to you and to all the organization for the invitation for us to be in Readmagine. We are really excited and we are really fond of this initiative and this event. So without going further, I'm sharing my screen. Hopefully you can all see it now.
Yeah, it's perfect. Just a little remark. Please remember that you can address questions to Verónica, and please say hello in the chat so we can interact each other and know who is attending the seminar. And the last but not least thing I wanted to share with you is that you have a poll, so you can answer and give us your views on the subject or on the issue that Verónica is going to talk from now. Now I mute myself.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, welcome everyone who is listening. I wish I could see your faces. I wish we could be together, but we've come to live this specific time in which I'm going to talk a bit now, also Corona context. I know we have all been overwhelmed with the amount of information going on the last 2 months. And of course, me as a social anthropologist, I have my biases, the certain topics that I'm interested on, not so much the sanitary emergency, but more the social experiment that seems to be happening in the world. So it has been a very sad time for all of us in many ways, but I have to recognize it's an exciting time for social scientists. There's so many things to look at right now. So I'm not going to go deep in anything about Antropología 2.0, as Luis already made a wonderful introduction of who we are. This is me with Pablo Mondragón. We are the two founders of the agency. So I'll move directly to what we'll be covering today, which is the Corona context. And how has it changed our behaviors, our beliefs, the way we connect with each other, the way we learn and search for information. And Homo sapiens, we have a great capacity to adapt to different contexts, as we have proven, living in different parts of the world with extreme conditions, climatic conditions, and different social conditions. So for us, it's not a surprise how quickly 2/3 of the population in the world adapted to a total lockdown and and the type of isolation and stress we've been submitted to. But what things will remain after the COVID-19 context and which will fade away is something that we've been questioning, asking a lot. And so at this moment, everybody wants to jump up to conclusions. We've been asked all the time, what impact will this have in the business in the next year, etc. It's really easy to fall and act on signals that are very easy to observe, like consumers are currently spending less money, or they're less optimistic about their budgets for the future. People are traveling less, of course. But which of these will remain and which not are what's really relevant, right? Some of the things we've been observing, quickly give you a sneak peek of some of them. So for example, the first one is a change in the way we perceive hygiene. Before COVID, the typical cleaning paradigm was based on the assumption that dirt is something visual, something that you can see, and therefore you can quantify, you can communicate, and you can act upon pretty easily. For example, a lot of the customer experience ratings that we've found in the last decade are based on this hygiene paradigm. For example, when you use a bathroom in an airport and then you leave the bathroom and you can rate with a smiley face or a serious face or a sad face, most of the times it was based on how clean those bathrooms were, right? This is changing, of course, and this will probably remain not as important as it is right now, but it is going to remain somehow. The change that dirt now can be invisible, right? There's a threat that is invisible. How will this affect to, for example, the book industry is also interesting in whether it will boost the digitalities of reading objects instead of the materialities, right? If materialities are seen as objects that can retain these kinds of invisible dirt, well, who would want then to have books in their houses or in their working spaces that are being touched by lots of different people and containing all that invisible dirt? So this is a very interesting social trend that we've been observing. Another one we've observed has to do with food, and we've called it bunker food, but it goes beyond the idea of bunker food. So bunker food was the original concept we gave it, and we were thinking on the patterns that were happening around the world, where people were rushing to supermarkets and buying many products, trying to buy shelf products with a long lifetime to procure themselves and their families during isolation. But there's also the trend of developing urban gardens or starting planting veggies and fruits, etc., when possible, because people try to have this auto sustainability in their homes as well, and this rethinking of where the food is coming, right? And another one we've been closely observing, of course, is the digitalization in general, and it has affected, of course, almost every sector. It comes with certain social gaps and distances, and it shows a lot of social stratification, but it has definitely pushed certain industries to increase the speed at which they are shifting to this digitalization. For example, the health sector, right, with many doctors seeing their patients remotely now, or the education sector, right, with many universities, schools, and high schools turning to virtual education in a matter of days. So this is going to put them in a interesting position of how will they respond and maintain this after the corona crisis. So for example, at the universities, where classes are now being recorded, if you already have the records, the videos of the professors giving a lecture, you can use that now indefinitely, right? For many years to come. So what would be the added value of a professor at an actual classroom? They're going to have to rethink and reinvent the way they are teaching, the way they are communicating and engaging with their students, right? And this, I think, it has also a big weight on the book industry in general. So there's a lot of changes going on, as we all know, and humans have a difficult time coping with changes many times. We thrive for a sense of stability, and that's when rituals come in, and they come in very strong. They've come in these last weeks. So our rituals have both changed and also been boosted and are emerging. Some that disappeared, like for example, putting on makeup. For many people, the ritual of putting on makeup in the morning is a ritual that helps them get prepared for the performances they'll be having to do on that specific day, right? It's a moment where you prepare yourself for going out into the world. So this ritual, for example, disappeared in many cases, right? But then we saw other rituals emerge. So of course, the washing the hands has become not just something hygienic, it has become a ritual in itself with all the narratives and beliefs around it. But we've seen others, like the applause, people clapping in their terraces and in their balconies in many countries in Europe, as a recognition to the health sector professionals. And then we see others also, like, for example, people were washing the food products when they brought them from the supermarket into their house, right? So they would wash the milk container, or they will wash the package of rice. And again, this is very interesting to analyze right now, interesting to see which trails of these rituals will maintain in the next years. But in general, these will be rituals that have helped us cope with the current situation, but that will not remain in the longer term. Now, it's not easy to distinguish which will stay and which will not, but those that has helped us cope and has helped us keep connected to each other will definitely remain in a way, even though they can be transformed. But there's like a certain essence that will remain with us. And this is because we need of each other to cope with these difficult situations. No man is an island, right? So we've been told for the last 2 months that we were doing social distancing, and I'm sure you've all heard many times this concept. And I'm not really king of this concept. I don't think it transmits well what it's intended. Of course, the definition, it's defined as a behavioral intervention intended to prevent the spread of coronavirus, in this case, by maintaining a physical distance. And that's why I've been defending for the last 2 months that we are not social distancing, we are physically distancing. And I think this is really important because, yes, we have all been physically isolated in our houses, but we've been very much connected in so many ways, right? So I do not agree that we've been socially distanced. Actually, we've been more connected than ever in certain ways, and that's thanks to technology. Many people reconnected with old friends, or reconnected with certain people in their family who they hadn't talked for in a long time. We've seen a lot of elderly people who didn't use certain platforms before, like WhatsApp for example, or Skype, and they are using them now to do video calls with their families. And so Harari, which is an author that I really like, talks about the advantage that humans have over the virus is the ability to exchange information, right? So a coronavirus in Korea cannot share information with a coronavirus in Spain, but Korea and the people of Korea can teach very valuable lessons to Spain. So we've been all sharing and feeling connected, right? And people use the technology to start doing the activities that they would normally do in their lives. Now they're doing it virtually. And this is an important point, because sometimes we think of this context of change as people start doing things randomly, out of the blue. And that's not how it happens. Most of the times transitions are going to go little by little, and starting always where the people were actually already doing certain things, right? So, for example, if you used to go out for beers with your friends on the weekend, it's likely that you've had a virtual beer gathering during the confinement. For example, I want to show you a little example of what I do. I love dancing. I love going out to dance, and I found a group of people that did virtual raves. So this was, 200 people in their living rooms dancing to the music that a DJ was playing for all of us. We were all in our houses. We didn't know each other. So it's kind of like a club, in the sense that you go into this space and you don't know most of the other people. You're just enjoying yourself, listening to music and dancing. Yet, why is it important to do it with other people? Why was this adding value to my experience rather than me dancing by myself in the living room? And that's because we need these things that brings us together and that makes sense to us still as the social animals that we are. And of course, books have always bring people together. So in the same line, but for the people who already read, now again, this is not going to be something for people who didn't read before Corona, but for people who already read, they still need the connection done through the books. So I found a few very interesting examples. First one is the silent Zooms. I'm very curious. I would like to know who of you have already heard about these silent Zooms. I find it really interesting. These are gatherings of book lovers where they make a Zoom session and you join in. You say hello. You can show the book that you're going to read, and then you mute yourself and you go down to your business of reading your books. Now you're alone in your house, but you're collectively reading. You're doing this together. Some of the people that have participated in the silent Zooms have described it as a similar experience to going to the library. When you go to the library, it kind of helps you concentrate, the context itself, the silence, of course, the fact that there's other people immersed in the same activity as you are. Also a bit of the social pressure, right? So some people said when you're in the library, you won't get distracted by your phone every 5 minutes because you kind of feel ashamed, other people are reading, so you just try to focus on reading. And this has helped people focus during the confinement as well, the silent Zooms. So obviously there's like the need of still having communities and still feeling in touch, even though we are far and even though we cannot gather physically. So people during the coronavirus started sharing platforms and pictures of their books. There's a hashtag that I followed that was coronavirus reading stack. So people, stockpiled their number of lectures that they wanted to read during the self-isolation. And I found this really interesting. I found it connected to the idea of reading as with the idea of nurture. So just as when our parents read us books when we were young, it was an activity of caring and of nurturing. And a lot of people have used this time in Corona context to nurture themselves and feel like they were caring for themselves as well. And book plays a big part in that well-being for many people, right? So some other things that have been happening in this sense are also the online book clubs. There's many that have happened, some that already existed before the Corona crisis, and some that have emerged in this time. So in spite of the self-isolation, there's been book clubs such as the Quarantine Book Club that offered the readers a chance to talk to the authors of a specific book, and they held questions and answers as well, so you could log into these sessions for a specific price between $5 and $15 for the session. There's been others, as I said, some that already existed, like Book Club's app, but the number of book clubs that they have in their app has increased 3,000 in the last 2 months. So that's a lot of new book clubs communities. And of course, the interesting of all these things is the digitality of it all. So it means that these communities can either go from phygital to digital or vice versa, in the way that they could exist prior to this context and be a group of people that gathered physically in a bookstore, and with this context they started doing it online. And it could also happen in the opposite way. These are communities that are being built online and that will sometime connect physically. So those are the communities that are typically more strong and add value to the people that belong to it, the ones that can live and add value in both spaces, the virtual and the physical one. And so another collective effort to create content that we've observed a bit is the Booktubers. And again, I don't know how many of you are aware of this, of these profiles of these people who are influencers especially for younger readers. That's true. So anywhere below 30 years old, it is said that these booktubers can have a 20% impact of increase or decrease of a sale of a book with one of their videos, one of their reviews. So there's many booktubers out there, and I recommend you to take a look at any of them to see how they are approaching this, and again, how they are creating community, how they are creating themselves as leaders of the editorial industry as well. So all of this, I think, are positive impacts of the current climate, and mostly thanks to technology, right? But there has been some down effects, if I can call it that way. So, for instance, the fact that we are multimedia, multimodal, multi-screen, constantly multitasking, with having, people having an average of 3 screens per user, and receiving an average of 1 notification at least every 10 minutes, when it takes approximately 15 minutes to concentrate on an activity, to actually get the waves of our brain to the level where we are highly focused on an activity, takes longer than how many times we get distracted, right? So many people have reported had hard time focusing on these times. Of course, adding all kinds of other different factors. Of course, parents who had their children at home have even had harder times focusing. students, yet alone, had a very difficult time shifting to the virtual education, etc. And so all of this has created what is being called as Zoom fatigue these days. So it's, yes, we can be connected through technology, and that's wonderful. Yet we have to understand that our brains have evolutionized for years and years, centuries and centuries, to relate with other people and with our environment in a specific way, right? So for example, our non-verbal communication is really important, even though we might not think consciously of it every day, but it's, plays like a 70% of the role of how we relate with other people, right? And when we have virtual meetings, we are losing all this information. For example, we don't see people's hands, we don't see their expressions, we don't see their body posture. Right now, you're listening to me and you're not seeing me talk, and that itself plays a big role in tricking our brains and kind of taking our experiences of how we are sharing knowledge with each other, etc. For example, also, the delay of technology it gives us a lot of anxiety. Silence are very important in communication, but when they are due to technology, it makes us anxiety. And so all of this has really affected a lot of people as well. And it's really interesting because things go in cycles mostly throughout history. And the thing that we've seen come after Zoom fatigue has been back to the analogic experiences. People wanted, again, to do things that did not require constant digitalization technology in their lives. So, for example, baking. I'm sure many of you have rediscovered that you actually have a kitchen in your house. Many countries, for example, the yeast has temporarily disappeared from the supermarket, so that's a great indicator. Sewing, for example, with many people doing their own masks, table games, and of course, books as well. So this is one of those things that, yes, it goes in cycles. So when we started the confinement, we were all highly connected through technology. Then there's like a decrease and we start doing this analogical experience. Yet this is not going to stop technology. Technology is one of those trends that will, not stop, rather than it was boosted thanks to Corona, right? So we still have to think on how to make calmer experiences through technology, right? How to bring these kinds of sensorial experiences through technology. And in that sense, I have a recommendation. If you or your organizations are developing any app, for example, to create book clubs or reader community of readers, or a way of marketplace, a way of selling editorial products, anything around those lines, if you are going to be using technology, which you most probably are going to, please take a look at the calm technology principles, which are created by a set of anthropologists. It's led by Amber Case. And I just put here some of the ideas in the principles, but you can find all of the information on their website. So technology should demand a small amount of attention from our side. It should always be available there for us. It should work even when it's broken, but it shouldn't be constantly distracting us. So, for example, the case that I gave you, right? Imagine university students nowadays having to read a vast amount of books and having a phone next to them that is sending them messages from their friends, families, and notifications from all the different companies and apps they're subscribed to. It's almost impossible for them to get to the concentration level that they need, unless they are muting their telephones or putting their telephones away in a different room, etc. And that is in itself kind of not making sense, because that phone should be a tool for them to be able to learn better. They should be able to integrate those digital tools in their education, right? So why would you have to separate it? We just need to make that technology fit better into our daily lives and into our specific needs, right? So maybe having a notification that does not have to make a sound, maybe having different ways of sharing with your device, that in this moment I'm reading, so unless it's like something really urgent, and you can actually choose what's in urgent. It could be, for example, my mother is calling. Unless my mother's calling, or unless this and that, I prefer the calls don't come through right now. So all these different things are to bear in mind when we are designing the future technologies. So just to sum up, you have a question in the poll. I'm really curious to know what your thoughts are on which trends will remain and which will vanish. But remember, many previously non-existent trends will vanish after COVID. So for example, washing hands, even though it's something that it's good for all, it's not complicated, etc. Probably the level of highly structurized, parameterized and repeated as it has been this time, it will not maintain. Yet other trends, Corona has acted as a catalyzer, and it's just boosting them, right? So that's, for example, the digitalization of education and of remote work, etc. Another thing I wanted to tell you, and this is because a lot of people now are like thinking on the future, and we get this question very often: what will the future be? Which ones will remain in the next future, etc. And the idea of future is it's very cultural as well. What we think future is and what we don't think future is. For example, it's a good example to see a little bit of the retro-futuristic. How they imagined in the 60s or in the 80s that the 2000s were going to be, and how far we are from that. So if you really want to be realistic about being able to prepare a strategy for your organization for the future, you need to always be very attentive to what's going on. And there's an example that people give, which I like a lot. So if you are, for example, driving your car and you get into an icy road and you lose control of your car, your first gut reaction will be to shift your car and try to brake and stop, right? But that actually is not what you have to do, and you probably will have an accident if you do that. So what you actually have to be doing is to have all your senses completely alert, to feel where the car is going and how each of your reactions is modifying the movement. So if you just go and slam the brakes, they'll have a totally different reaction than if you hit slowly. So the same thing is when we are preparing for the futures. There's not a future, there's not a future that is already written there. So there's futures in plural. More specifically, I like to talk about futures scenarios. And there you have to look at all the different elements that you want to consider and that are relevant, pertinent for your specific work of action. And think about cascade effects. So think if something changes in one specific area, how will it affect to all of the other areas? So this is a systemic thinking that will allow you to get a lot closer to the future possible scenarios. And then the last one, I always like to give this advice, is think or be like an ethnographer. So just be very attentive to all the signs, observational signs that you can see, have dialogues with people, listen to people. People love to talk, to share, and to be listened. So for your specific industry, well, I think it's really relevant ask people, you know, how are they learning nowadays? What do they understand as reading? What does reading mean to them, right? And yeah, so that's all from my side. If you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer them now. And also, you have there my email in case you want to reach out.
Okay, thank you very much, Veronica. It's time to open our cameras, so I'm going to read some of the questions we got for you. The first one is how the massive digital connection during the lockdown could affect workflows. Is there the seed of a big shift in the way people work within a company or between companies? Thank you.
Well, absolutely. So the way we work has been changing a lot anyways in the last decades. So again, following the pattern that my intervention had, where some trends are going to be fading and some trends are going to be maintained throughout the time. So for example, we went from the 90s having this block kind of spaces where people had their own tiny square space. And then in the 2000s, we were all into these open spaces, right, where everybody had to be together and in the same table, etc. So I think we will start going somewhere more in the middle. You know, I don't think everything will be so open in the next years. Like, for example, unfortunately, for co-working spaces, which seem to be like very sustainable business in the last decade, probably they'll have a lot of challenges to adapt the working spaces in general. But not only the working spaces, I think the working spaces are relevant, but you know, everything in the doctor offices and the education spaces, and even in, you know, what about the urban spaces, right? About the benches in the park. What about, you know, these places that we all use and inhabit together? How are we going to be able to deal with this new paradigm shift where we won't know if it's dirty or not, or, you know, if it's contaminated or not? So a lot of open questions there. I don't have a specific answer.
Very well. So I will jump to one of the questions related to the last things you were talking about, and then I will come back to the other one. Considering the hygiene paradigm shift you described, what would be the way forward for public libraries in the coming months?
Yeah, public libraries and book exchange. I'm very fond of book exchange, for example, in certain cafeterias here in Valencia. So that's definitely going to be threatened for the next years, or this year at least. Possible recommendations. I mean, of course, there's a lot of different ways. I've worked in archives. When you work in archives, you have to wear plastic gloves to look at a lot of books and a lot of materials. You're not just allowed to walk in with, you know, just freely wearing anything. So maybe we'll have to adapt that, at least with certain specific types of books and materials of consult. And then, of course, fortunately, most of the big libraries have been doing a tremendous effort on digitalizing most of their books, a lot of their books. So that will be another offer they'll have to be opening to their public, right?
There's another one. Were you able to seize the silent room trend, e.g., in which countries it was stronger, and do you think this will be the long-lasting phenomenon?
It's happened a lot in the States, I know, and I'm not sure which countries in Europe were stronger, you know, where had more people doing silent Zooms. I do think it's going to remain. That's one of the trends I think will remain. So the silent book, the silent Zooms and the digital book clubs, definitely, yes, because, you know, people are more nomads also, people are moving around, and that's something that it's going to go back. People will start traveling again and moving again. And they want to have this sense of belonging to these communities, even though they cannot be so attached to a specific location. And there's just something really special about reading a book and being able to discuss it with other people, other like-minded minds. So definitely, I think that's one trend that is going to remain, and I think it's a very important one for all of you to keep attentive to.
Thank you. How do you think confinement has affected the cultural consumption habits in the components of so-called Z generation, the Z generation? Thank you.
Can you repeat the question? How
Yeah.
has the confinement?
How do you think the confinement has affected the cultural consumption habits of the components of so-called Z generation? So the youngest segment of ages in consumers.
Right. Maybe they are the ones that are going to be least affected. I think in a way, since they are in such a specific time of socialization, I think what it has affected them more is that we are seeing that the youngest people are the ones that are showing more frightening to going out now to the streets again. This is not happening so much with adults, but we are seeing it a lot with people between 10 and 18. So now they are themselves isolating, even though they can now go out for walks or go to small family friends gatherings. So that's something to keep in mind. They've all felt, or not all, but a lot of them have felt pretty abandoned also in the process, for example, of the shift in the education. So I think that's going to be a big threat for education in general, for public education. Public education needs to be, meet the standards of these young people who are very demanding in what they want and how they want to receive it. So if not, there's a big threat that private online schools will be, of course, the future source of learning for all these younger educations, because they're more interactive, because they're more dynamic, because they're more entertaining, and at the same time, it's meeting the purpose of learning. So yes, a lot to see there.
So there are many questions on the future. So you will become a kind of futurist. One of them was related to the new role of the analog, and it reminded me of this book, which is rather interesting. So do you think that the analog will become a kind of luxury?
Kind of luxury. No, I don't think it will become a luxury. I think what will become a luxury is the digital materialities. So everything that is able to transmit the same experiences that you can have with materials, with objects, with paper, but through digital, and that's still something very new. So just to give you a very, very simple example, and this is far from digital materialities, but when you send an email to someone with some information, the feeling that the person receives is very different if I send you that information embedded in the email, just in the regular email, or if I send you a PDF with the information. Even though the PDF is also, digital, it gives the sense of a physical document. It gives the sense of this letter, more formal. So that's just like a tiny example for you to understand what I'm talking about. But there are going to be luxurious propositions that are going to go on that way, like how to combine the best of the digital and the best of the material.
So there is not a revenge of the analog, as the title of the book states. And the last one, this is from me. You are coordinating within Readmagine work group on precisely behaviors on the consumer's side. And I think that the most important question and the most frequent question we are having now as a part of the Readmagine community is whether some of the trends that could imply a kind of acceleration of the digital, within the lockdown stage, or consolidation are going to remain, as you started explaining previously, or we are going to have a different future scenarios, which is a very interesting word, a very interesting idea you use. So are we going to a society with very different scenarios, depending on income, depending on countries, cultural, or maybe there is going to be a convergence? Because, for instance, in Italy or in Spain, we are much more fond of proximity and socialization in a very physical mode than in other countries in Northern Europe. Do you think that are we going to some kind of unification in these trends?
I don't think so. No, and even though the norms of physical distancing or how to avoid spreading the corona in general have been pretty much the same, the general norms have been the same. The way that the population have reacted to them or have implemented or not are very different, of course, and they attend to cultural differences. So, like you say, for example, in Italy and Spain, we are cultures of getting close to each other, of touching each other when we're talking. We give 2 kisses. What's going to happen with the 2 kisses? Will this disappear, etc.? And you see, for example, that's places where the elbow greeting have become really important. Now, if you think about it, why is it important to touch each other with the elbow? It's because we still have the need of that contact, of that embodied contact, right? So the places where this types of greetings, there's other places where it's being with the foot. I've seen certain places in Asia where they greet each other with a touch on the on the foot. So the places where these things have been stronger are probably going to go back to their original ways of saying hello to each other, because they have that embedded need that is still there, very strong. It's just like it's kind of silent right now, and not just with the greetings in general. With I mean, if you think about technology and digital experiences, for example, even though a smartphone is a smartphone everywhere in the world, I can guarantee you that the way it's perceived, the way it's used, the value that it has, and the symbolic that it creates all around it, it's very different in Europe than it is in China, for example, or that it's in New Zealand. So it's still cultural factors are super. Of course, they're invisible, but they're like these strong fluxes of connections, and they're the ones that actually make most of the things sustain. So whatever you put into the equation, if there's like a big different cultural strat, it will have a different impact. I'm not sure if I made that really clear, but we will. Yeah.
Maybe the example you used of the smartphone could be applied to the bookstores or to the libraries. So meaning that if we use anthropology, as you do, in order to design new kind of experiences for booksellers or for librarians or for the policy making, should be different in Europe or in Asia, for instance.
Well, yeah, what I'm saying is that even if they're the same, they'll be received differently. So I'm going to give you an example. I did a project for Uber once, right? And we were analyzing different features that Uber has in the platform. So Uber had this idea of having a feature where you can track a person who's riding the Uber. So me as a Western woman, young woman, I felt it like a security thing, like good, I can go in an Uber by myself at 3:00 in the morning and send the link to my friends, and they know I arrived home, safely. But we did research in different countries, and for example, in Egypt, this feature was perceived totally different by women. Because before the Uber had that was one of the few moments in life when they were free in a way that they didn't have their husbands or their father on top of them controlling them. They could take a taxi or they can take an Uber. Nobody knows about them for half an hour. Now with this feature, their husbands oblige them to put on that feature and control them and know exactly where they are going. So it's the same feature, but it's received and perceived totally different because there's a different base on the bottom.
Okay, that's very clear. Now I understand much better my teenager daughter. So I take note of that. Thank you very much, Veronica. We will work together during the next weeks on that work group. And I would like to remind the attendees that tomorrow we will have at the same time at 11 o'clock Paris, Madrid time, Michael Bush, and in the afternoon, Michael Tumbling at 5:30. Thank you very much all.